Watertown Water and Sewer Bipartisan Committee. And today is Monday, January 5th, to go over our challenge, if you will. These are our objectives. Number one, to recommend safeguards that will help prevent similar situations from arising in the future. Number two, to recommend policies and/or procedures to ensure the public remains informed. And number three, to examine the business relationship between the town council and the Water and Sewer Authority and recommend any appropriate changes. So I would like to call this meeting to order. And for the roll call, I am Michelle McHugh, I'm the chair.
Dan Cochiola.
Adam Simonson. Joe Chabot.
Jeffrey Cheney.
And as usual, we will begin with public participation, starting with Barbara Zarowski.
You call me Zalkowski. You
So,
call me Barbara
sorry.
Z. That's okay.
Barbara Z.
Barbara Z. Good evening, Barbara Zalkowski, 17 Mallory Road. I do not speak for or represent the Watertown Fire District, but I want to address the testimony given by Town Attorney Paul Jessel. Attorney Jessel stated that he would not have done anything differently and still did not believe the town should have lost the lawsuit, despite the fact that Watertown has now lost 3 times in court. That position alone should concern every resident. When repeated, I didn't realize what
I know you started that.
Okay, thank you. Barbara Zalkowski, 17 Mallory Road. I do not speak for or represent the Watertown Fire District, but I want to address the testimony given by Town Attorney Paul Jessel. Attorney Jessel stated that he would not have done anything differently and still does not believe the town should have lost the lawsuit, despite the fact that Watertown has now lost 3 times in court. That position alone should concern every resident. When repeated losses produce no reflection or course correction, we must ask what, if anything, has been learned. Continuing litigation without reassessment raises serious concerns about judgment, stewardship of taxpayer dollars, and whether the town had the appropriate legal guidance for an issue of this magnitude. What is equally troubling is that nearly every witness in positions of authority and significant compensation offer the same response. They would not change a thing. That lack of accountability should alarm this community. Leadership requires the ability to reassess decisions, especially when those decisions result in repeated losses and long-term financial consequences. The town council must ask itself whether the right people are in the right positions. We were told the town's only options were to raise rates or get Waterbury back to the negotiating table. The record shows otherwise. Waterbury was willing to negotiate and reduce the judgment if the town and the Water and Sewer Authority agreed to Waterbury's new rates. Watertown refused outright to pay those rates. That refusal eliminated any meaningful path to settlement, and yet residents of both WSA and the Fire District are paying Waterbury residential rates regardless. I also need to correct the record regarding Attorney Jessel's statement to the Fire District. It was not the Fire District that drew the line in the sand. That line was drawn by 2,200 district residents who refused to absorb millions tied to a general obligation bond they had no control over and no benefit from. This was not a Fire District debt bond. Those decisions were made by the town council, town manager, and town attorney. Yet Fire District residents are now being portrayed as unreasonable. Asking them to absorb this cost would force them to pay twice, while WSA ratepayers who benefited from the bond bear none of that burden. If the town chooses to act against these residents, that decision will not be forgotten by voters. The bipartisan committee raised the concept of tolling, a standard standby agreement used to pause litigation while claims are evaluated. That option was never pursued. According to Attorney Jessel, he never thought of it. Given the stakes, that failure raises serious concerns about diligence and judgment. Finally, while the judge ruled Waterbury's rates to be fair and reasonable, we were told Waterbury threw numbers at the town during settlement discussions. Those numbers have never been made public. Where are they? At the same time, the Fire District presented clear figures showing Waterbury's billing practices are flawed. Instead of challenging those bills directly, the town deflected responsibility. As it stands, Watertown residents are effectively being billed twice due to I&I. So I asked the commission directly, after 3 court losses, refusal to negotiate, failure to consider tolling, and the lack of transparency, do we really truly have the right people in the right positions? And if not, when will this commission ensure that the town council holds leadership accountable to residents who pay these bills? Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I?
Sure.
Thank you. I'd like it on record.
Absolutely. Next, Catherine Dinsmore.
various interviews during the past 2 committee meetings, we still do not know who made the decision to begin underpayments to Waterbury and who allowed that practice to continue for 7 full years, leaving water and sewer ratepayers with a catastrophic $36.1 million bill. When asked about details of Waterbury's settlement offer in 2023, the town attorney stated that Waterbury's settlement offers were, quote, unrealistic. What is unrealistic and unconscionable is that our government leaders didn't have the business and financial acumen, let alone the common sense, to acknowledge that accepting Waterbury's water and sewer rates was far less a financial burden on our ratepayers than repaying a 20-year, $34 million bond. The decisions made by our town government caused the largest financial disaster in the history of our town. And yet the majority of those interviewed stated that they would not have done anything differently. Nor did those same people show any remorse for the financial hardship that is now the responsibility of ratepayers who had little to no knowledge of Watertown's decision to underpay Waterbury and never had the chance until after Watertown lost this lawsuit to voice their objections. So now, ratepayers are paying the rates that Waterbury wanted in the first place, plus bond payments for the next 20 years. Chair McHugh states the committee's objectives before each of the committee meetings. These objectives do not include identifying who made these decisions. It will be impossible to recommend changes in policies and procedures without determining who made these decisions and what governmental bodies or individuals approved them. Not identifying who made these devastating decisions will just perpetuate the practice of making decisions in executive session without the public's knowledge. And I believe that is how we got where we are in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Richard Lazansky.
Good evening. There are still a number of questions yet to be answered by this committee. The first question of importance is, who made the decision to short pay Waterbury? Several of the previous interviewees thought the decision originated within the WSA, but since the Bipartisan Committee has not interviewed any of the original 2018 WSA members, several of whom remain current WSA members, it is impossible to verify that assumption. In the September 7, 2023 public forum, the current town manager admitted under public questioning that he had instructed the Water Department to continue the practice of underpayment of Waterbury invoices. Was this a unilateral decision, or was the town council or WSA consulted in this decision? Another question is why the short paying of Waterbury and the resulting lawsuit were hidden from the public. The majority of Watertown residents first learned of the water and sewer lawsuit on July 29, 2023, the day after we lost the judgment for $18.8 million. Although the Waterbury Republican American reported on the lawsuit at least twice prior to the July 2023 judgment, there was no open discussion of it within the WSA or the town council, nor any press releases from the town manager. Waterbury sued Watertown on December 19, 2018 for non-payment. In the next regular town council meeting minutes of January 7, 2019 is the statement, quote, correspondence placed in file. The town received a complaint through Superior Court from Waterbury regarding the water bill, end quote. A copy of the 9-page civil summons detailing the underpayment amounts, accrued interest, and demand for payment was included in each town council member's packet. However, that packet was not made available to the public and is still not available to the public, except via an FOI request. There was no discussion at that meeting by any council member or the town manager about the court summons, despite the summons demanding nearly $1 million. There would be no mention of any lawsuit with Waterbury in any town council meeting minutes for another 2 years. The meeting minutes for the regular WSA meetings of January, February, March, and April of 2019 all document executive sessions on, quote, the water and sewer contract with the city of Waterbury, end quote. And WSA meeting minutes do not inform the public that Watertown is being sued by Waterbury for non-payment. The appearance given is that the town council and the WSA decided to keep knowledge of this lawsuit from the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mary Ann Rosa?
Very obviously, I support what your committee is doing, and I look forward to what your recommendations are. Number one, I don't believe that the February 1st deadline or first council meeting in February is a realistic date. I think, having been on the council since 2009, there's a lot more depth and a lot more information that you really need to hear and go into. As you can hear from what some of the public are saying, they still don't think they have any answers. Well, they certainly should have. And I think there are things that, or people maybe that you should have talked to. For example, Ray Meany was the council chairman at the time that the contracts were signed. He might be someone that could give you a handle on what occurred then. I just think you need a little more depth and a little more time. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so, for new business, we have discussion of the interview responses, and I broke them out by, area, if you will. So the first area is the Water and Sewer Authority, which consisted of Joe Massey, Dave McMahon, and then Jerry Lukowski with the last round of interviews. So if I can give you my impressions of these, and then those of you who were present, if you'd like to share yours. And we'll do this throughout each area, and then move on to analysis.
Sounds great.
So, my impression of Dave McMahon, was that WSA continued short paying Waterbury because of the statutes. He said, as did Joe and Jerry, that no formal risk management process existed for WSA. WSA sets the rates the public will pay based on the budget, and the decision to appeal was made by the WSA board and was discussed in executive session and then voted on during the regular meeting. Similar to him was Joe Massey. They both felt that Watertown should have prevailed in the court case. Joe was informed of the issue with Waterbury when he came on board in 2022, just based on general conversations. Joe felt that because no contract existed at that time, Waterbury could increase their rates as much as they wanted to, saying he felt that we should have won the court case. Jerry, very similar, no oversight mechanisms or risk management processes. He would not have done anything differently except win the case. He was told by the town attorney the case was not a slam dunk. If the rates went into effect, they would be there for decades, and the town would have to go to public hearings anytime Waterbury raised their rates. He did say there was a $10 million reserve, but 6 of that $10 million had to be kept for operational concerns, normal operations. Anyone else like to share?
That's consistent with what I heard as well. I think one thing that I extracted was that it's clear WSA exercises primary operational control over rate setting. I don't think there's any certainly didn't happen in public session. So we know WSA exercised primary operational control, but we also see that there's no record of it in the public meetings. And that's an important point to hone in on in terms of two pieces of information. And so what's fascinating framing-wise for me is the town council has the authority to oversee, and yet I heard the town council chair say that it was his understanding at the time that they operated autonomously. And so I think we had a real diffusion of authority happening. So that's an important place to put a pin for me.
Absolutely, absolutely. And they are, according to the charter, they're autonomous. They have operational efficiency, they run the operations, but they are semi-autonomous. And they are a subordinate body of the town council.
To come back to that, with the 4B on the idea of oversight. Yeah.
I just want a point of clarification for my own edification, so I understand. In executive session, minutes are not required?
That's correct. They're not kept.
They're not kept. And so there's no recording of what happens in executive session?
No votes are taken in executive session, and votes are taken once the committee comes out of executive session, is my understanding.
Is there guidelines as to what town matters can be discussed in executive session?
There are.
And it's pretty narrow, I mean, but litigation is almost always one that's considered acceptable.
Okay.
If I can jump, I mean, so one of the things that struck me from those interviews is a lot of the current process around WSA is very driven around sort of annual budget, annual process. There's not a lot of structured long-term process in there, right? And I think Dave might have said it or Joe, in terms of a long-term capital budget, right? And which anytime you're doing, I mean, really water and sewer utilities, when you think about it, you're making big investments, right? In normal times, right? You're putting pipe in the ground that's lasting decades, right? You're making these long-term investment decisions, and it's very hard to run those when you're just looking at what do we need to do to pay the bills for this year. And so if you force a long-term budgeting process, right, where you might be approving rates and an operational budget on an annual year, but you're refining longer-term capital budgets, it forces you to think financially long-term, and you start thinking about things like litigation, risk management, other pieces as you're trying to budget in there and trying to move forward.
Is that something that this committee could make a formal recommendation that?
I think it's something that should be considered as we try to holistically put all this together. That's one of the things that I think we should think about whether that belongs there. I mean, you know, what I would consider well-functioning municipal utilities almost always have a 5-year, 7-year, 10-year kind of capital budget, long-term forecast that they're, becomes a guidebook for you in terms of where you want your spending to go over the long term. And when you do that, you're trying to think about what are rates going to look like over the long term so that you can balance your short-term and long-term thinking. And obviously, if you have a huge chunk of your expenses being paid for wholesale water or wholesale sewage treatment, that becomes a huge variable in there, and it forces you to, you know, to think, you know, in a detailed way about where that's going.
And just to be clear, we don't have that.
Right, correct. That doesn't exist today, right? So the annual budgeting process seems pretty reasonable in terms of you're going line item by line item, you're understanding what is all the cash that has to go out the door in the next fiscal year, and you're scrutinizing that and trying to do that, you know, spend as little money as possible. But it's that sort of long-term thinking that you have to watch out for, because all of a sudden you get things put in front of you in an annual budget that you feel like, hey, I don't have any choice for this, because it kind of popped up on us, right?
other than what was relayed, which was overwhelmingly, you relied on the town attorney. But we don't really know what happened in those conversations. So, and fast forward several years later, I mean, we can only make assumptions and speculate as to what really happened, but without minutes, without really knowing, without having proper oversight mechanisms. The point to what's been brought up here is that there's a lot of unanswered questions.
Okay.
One other,
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I think we, and I know we're in the process of doing it, but it keeps coming up is accountability, right? The town, you know, who made the decision? Who made the decision to short pay? Let's identify that. I know that's part of what we're doing. Let's identify that, but, and one of the things we're focused on doing is coming up with suggestions on how we're not back in the same boat. And then, is there anything that can be done? I know we've already agreed to the bond. Is there anything that we can do is there litigation left to, you know, is there another path that we could to maybe recoup some of that money for the townspeople? I don't know. I'm just a question. I'm thinking, you know, that's a big thing because everybody, the vast majority of people are living paycheck to paycheck. And when you all of a sudden look at your water sewer bill and it's doubled, it's a big hit. And so that's where a lot of the discomfort in the community, and we want to do whatever we can to figure out how it happened, bring it to light. I know kind of speaking what the charge has been given to us, but to continually drill down so we can say, okay, we've identified the problem, here's what happened, here's why it happened, and here's what we're going to do to put some shoring in place so it doesn't happen again.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, so WSA is responsible for paying the bills, the water and sewer authority, correct? Right, as part of their normal course of operations, which, you know, shows the purchasing threshold, et cetera, but, you know, certain things are.
So we could say that the buck stops at WSA.
Well, I don't know, but I mean, I guess I haven't heard the sort of clear answer with that, but I mean, in terms of the organization that has the responsibility to pay the bills and to approve them is WSA. So whether it was documented properly in minutes and all of that might be a, you know, completely separate administrative function, right?
Well,
But-
WSA determines the rates, and then that budget, that influences the budget, which goes to the town manager,
Mhm.
and then to the town council, is my understanding of how it goes.
Well, let me put it a different way, right? So WSA has all kinds of bills to pay, right? They're putting fuel in trucks, they're buying equipment, they're doing all those things. Somebody is approving those invoices when they come in from the vendor and is then authorizing them to be paid, right? I'm assuming that that is WSA. And Waterbury is just another supplier, like all the other suppliers that WSA has. So if somebody was making a decision to short pay the invoice, I would assume that it has to be approved by WSA.
And so, I think you're right, and I think, Joe, your questions are good ones. I think some of the answers that, what I've heard, come through in 4B, C, D, and E. So I'd love for us to run through those as well,
Sure.
just to get the depth of those pieces.
Okay, so 4B were the two legal interviews, Franklin Pilisi and Paul Jessel. Franklin Pilisi provided a historical perspective. He wrote a memo in April of 2020 to John Gavalis saying to vigorously defend the court case, but to immediately increase the water and sewer rates and put the money into a reserve, which we know didn't happen.
So what was the date of that?
April 2020. He recommended a public meeting to get the word out, and he also attended a mediation session in 2018 with the attorneys from Waterbury, Watertown, and a retired judge. Excuse me. His impression was that Waterbury was not serious about negotiating. My impression of Paul Jessel, numerous meetings beginning in 2017, pre-judgment settlement authorized the continuation of the old rates. Mediation was done before the trial. Waterbury did not do a long-term contract and was unwilling to enter into negotiations, which reduce the water sewer rates. Legal strategy to appeal was unanimous on both WSA and town council sides. And Watertown tried to settle on many occasions, Waterbury would not. That is my impression of the two attorneys.
So I think one of the things that I heard Attorney Jessel state was that he articulated advice to town officials that mirrored Attorney Polisi's advice, which was to also set aside funding. And this is where, as I read through the notes, the record doesn't yet show how that advice was reflected in WSA's actions. Did WSA hear that advice and not follow it? Or was that advice given informally? Or was that advice not given in a way that they heard? And that to me is a really important question to understand. Because if the leadership of WSA chose to not follow legal advice, that's one set of issues. And if our town attorney didn't vociferously communicate that advice, that's a different issue. And if they went forward against legal counsel, and he didn't follow up in writing, then that's again an issue. So I definitely want to stop at that point and take a look at that piece. Where was the communication between WSA leadership and our town's legal representation who should have been protecting us from this liability?
So can I just ask
yeah.
a quick, so was there a formal legal opinion from Attorney Pilisi saying he
Yes.
set a reserve aside?
Yes.
It was a memo to John Cavallis at the request of John Cavallis.
Yeah, gotcha, gotcha. And then, so I think you're saying, where did that go at that point? Did that ever make it to the town council? Did that?
Well, so last week during interviews, I asked Attorney Jessel if he had given that advice to town officials. And he reported that he had given that advice to town officials. And I guess my statement is, I believe it, but I don't see evidence of it. And so that to me is concerning.
One clarification, Tony, just so when we talk about putting money aside, the only way in which that would have been able to do would be to raise rates
Of course.
to create that reserve.
Of
So it's
course.
not like there was some other bucket of money that magically create the reserve. It would have to come from the ratepayers to do
Right.
that. So
Right.
it would have been a trivial decision to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, so there definitely would have been evidence.
Yeah.
Yes, without question. And I also think, there's also some unresolved questions regarding whether any settlement offer was made by Waterbury and how that information was communicated and whether any decisions to reject that settlement was formally considered or documented. I appreciated his statement that there was no reasonable offer. I'd really like to have this committee have a sense for what is reasonable and what isn't reasonable, and I think that's our duty to look at that. So those are my two areas within the legal framework that I think we need to look at more closely.
Would that come in the form of a follow-up question to the two attorneys saying, we're looking for documentation, or whichever it was, just at the time?
Yeah, so I made a note that you may want to make a motion for Attorney Jessel to request documentation from him. But I also think it might be in the form of interviewing additional people who may have that information as well. Yeah, absolutely, right.
Well, I'm sorry, real quick, you had mentioned something about if we would have to raise the rate for reserve. Is there any portion right now currently coming from the rate, sewer rate to go into reserve for what ifs?
Yeah, I don't know what the current budget looks
Okay.
like.
I believe that's part of the whole budget process with WSA, the town there.
That might be a recommendation after we figure all this out is, hey, proactively, let's make sure a percentage of rates, whatever that is, even if it's a small percentage, starts going to a reserve.
I do think we need to try to get evidence that Attorney Jessel did recommend, because from what I heard and what they offered, they were it sounded from the attorneys, this was a slam dunk case. And you brought up the question last week, we got to the point where he said, was there any risk mitigation thought of, even brought forward? And nobody could offer any information on that. I mean, even at a low level, yes, Pelosi did put in a memo, we should set up a reserve. That's the only piece of any risk mitigation whatsoever. And Attorney Jessel, I should think throughout this process, especially if it wasn't a slam dunk case, we should have, whether it's the WSA, town council, obviously it's all in executive session, so we don't really have it, right? But there should have been a lot of pieces placed in on what we could have done to make sure if we don't win, what's going to happen. And we've been given no information that any of that has been put forward whatsoever. Actually, I think the answer was no. Like, it was never discussed. Nothing was ever discussed.
Well, I mean, in general, right, when you want to, I mean, here's my professional experience, when you want to consider litigating something, right? Because litigation has uncertain outcomes, right? Because for every attorney on your side that says it's a slam dunk, the other one on the other side saying the same thing. And so you're always going to have an uncertain outcome. So you have to sit there and you have to realistically weigh probabilities of winning, probabilities of losing, weigh legal costs in there, et cetera. One of the things that snuck up, I believe, that snuck up on the town in this is this litigation started in 2018, right? If you look at the original summons, I think it's a collection effort for like 300, 400 grand or something, right? Because it's a very finite period of time. Short paid for 2 quarters, whatever he said we're going to sue. So you're sitting there and you're thinking from a governance perspective saying, okay, we've got a $400,000 issue we've got to deal with, right? Well, and then so in the middle of this you had COVID, which gummed up everything in the court system, right? So the length of the litigation let this balloon, right? And so whatever calculus you were doing in 2018 to say this is an acceptable risk, I think there's a question to say, what is the ongoing process of the town to continue to reevaluate ongoing litigation? Because time changes things, right? And in this case, the magic of compounding interest is really what ended up, on top of the fact that the principal's building up because you're continuing to short pay year after year after year. So I think, because I've heard it from some of the witnesses, this is what we did in the past and it worked out. You sort of played hardball with Waterbury and say, guys, this is silly, let's just agree on something, and they do it, and it would play out over months. Well, this played out over 7 years with 18% interest. And so I think it's a fair question to think about procedurally going forward for the town. How do we reevaluate litigation decisions as the clock ticks? Because the decision we make today might be different than tomorrow, just purely based on that.
Even to that point, there are certain remedies that can be put in place, standby agreements, right? I mean, at a basic level, there are things to stop the clock, especially if it's going to go over a long period of years. I mean, obviously nobody knew COVID was going to enter in, but if this is going to, no court case really goes, it's not like Waterbury's going to say, we're going to sue you and we're going to get done in 6 months, right? It's going to go on years. So there's remedies that weren't even considered that I think probably from a basic level should have been.
We had from the town council, we had Jonathan Ramsey. He learned about the liability through executive session. WSA sets the rates. Legal strategy to appeal was communicated council. A town meeting was held which had hundreds of people attending, and WSA rates were increased in 2023 in response to the liability and audited financials. I know that Jeff, you had asked him a question about executive session, but it wasn't answered, so.
Right, we didn't get much information about
No.
really what happened in executive
No.
session. I didn't necessarily think we would, but it's worth asking. But at least Jonathan Ramsey was the only participant that stated he would have done something different. And that at least shows, okay, there were some considerations to what happened. Cases were lost. You wish that there was a reserve set up earlier. At least there's some acknowledgement. We didn't get that from any other participants. It seemed like, at least from my impression of him, he felt WSA was in control of what was going on. That's the way I took it anyways. He felt that USA was kind of in control of that, and I mean, we've already talked about the autonomy, and I think that kind of played in here. That's at least the impression I got.
Okay, so so WSA members are appointed by the town council, though, correct? Right, so they're not an autonomous body in the sense of they're a sub, I mean, they have certain powers that are delegated to the WSA, but I mean, assuming that WSA is acting contrary to the governing body of the town, there's remedies there that the town can have, so I don't know that it's appropriate to throw your hands up in the air and say WSA was doing whatever it wanted to do, right?
WSA, the superintendent is hired by.
The superintendent's an employee, yeah, but they're not a voting member of the WSA, I don't believe.
I don't know.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. I would think that they're, obviously.
So WSA superintendent is hired by,
The town.
They're a town employee.
their town employee, yeah. And the other members are appointed by the town council.
Anything you would like to add? Town managers, we had John Cavallis and Mark Ramo. My impression, John was very familiar with the budget from his role as police chief. He said, given the 18% interest rate, if he had to do something differently, he would pay the 18% under protest. He suggested a deep dive into WSA and town council minutes to find out what happened. He received little information from the previous town manager who had had medical issues before leaving. It was my impression that he was pretty much inundated with COVID right after he came on board, and that occupied the majority of his time. Mark Ramo, WSA votes on the budget, it goes to the town manager. Usually the budget is accepted, but last year WSA was adding personnel to the budget, and Mark did not approve that, or actually lowered the budget itself. WSA and town council received legal advice and warnings about the liability from the town attorney. No oversight mechanisms exist. Per Connecticut general statutes, the rates are set by WSA, who has the final say. The strategy to appeal, again, was done in 2 executive sessions, WSA and town council, with the vote being done in public. And there are still questions about whether Waterbury has charged Watertown correctly and allocated the money to the right categories.
Yeah, that's consistent. I do think, too, because Gonzalez said, he made a comment that at the time when he came in, obviously it was interim, he remembered hearing about the 18% interest. And he thought at that time, wow, at least what he said was, this was a cause for pause. But it didn't sound like we ever paused on that. So I don't know if that was just his own thought at the time, or if that was pursued anywhere else.
finance director in May of '24. She was relayed info about the liability verbally and through the outstanding bill. She said that WSA has the statutory authority to set the rates, and the liability was disclosed in the audited financials for fiscal year '22 and '23. And that was what I gained from her. Anything else?
No. You have some meat for item
Go
5?
for it.
Okay. So on agenda item 5, analysis of existing information. So I spent a good deal of time trying to process what this means for where we are. And I think key finding, authority was fragmented. I think that's, I said it from the dais here last week. That was something that came across to me. Authority was fragmented, and that made making key decisions really challenging. I'm not sure some particular person was behind the wheel. There may have been, we haven't uncovered it yet, but it appears more likely to me that the diffusion created the structural problem, and that is something that needs to be fixed. Critical decisions, however, occurred in executive session, and we don't know what happened there. I think one of the ways that we'll find out is by asking our town legal counsel to share with us any advice that he shared with the WSA or the town council in respect to advice on what to do with holding money back, raising rates, so that we wouldn't put ourselves in that financial situation. If he has evidence of that they then shared in executive session, that would be meaningful and would indicate that in executive session they did not follow that legal advice. If he can't find evidence of that, then that's meaningful as well. But that will go a long way to helping us understand what did or didn't happen in executive session. No formal risk management framework was in place, and Jeff, you're great on this, I think, which is critical. The increasing financial exposure over multiple years, which Adam, I think I just heard you say, which multiple town managers, so transitions are occurring and leadership changes, and so one of the things, and again, this comes back to where is the legal advice as our legal strategy in respect to this lawsuit as a new town manager is coming on board, whether or not it's an interim in Mr. Gavalis or whether or not it's a permanent in Mr. Ramo. At the time of transition, what is the formality of that? And what's the time of getting up to speed? Because what I heard last week was that didn't happen immediately, right? And so if Mr. Jessel has some documentation about that, that would be helpful.
I think there's also another avenue besides Attorney Jessel. There were also attorneys from Hartford.
They're right.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely. So I think, I think until these questions are answered, the committee, our job is to exercise the oversight authority of the council. That's what we're doing here. But we cannot determine whether the legal advice was clearly given and disregarded, whether it was informal and documented, never presented in a way that required action. As legal counsel to the town, a reasonable person's expectation would be that the material litigation risk is affirmatively communicated, documented, and elevated in a manner designed to mitigate financial exposure to the town. So I believe that who was advised? When was the advice given? How was it communicated? Was it formal inviting the following people to be interviewed. The Water and Sewer Authority board members, including Vincent Caterina, William Hedberg, Debbie DeSima, and James Sugden. Thank you. Listen, they were seated at the time of the rate withholding strategy, and when legal risk was first clearly articulated, they can help us clarify whether advice regarding reserves for rate increases was presented, whether votes occurred related to withholding payment or settlement concepts, why risk mitigation was not implemented during the early years of litigation. I think we need to make an effort to reach out to the former town manager, Bob Scannell, whether or not he's able to follow up with us, we can't control. But as town manager, at the time when Waterbury's revised rates were communicated, Mr. Scannell was positioned at the intersection of the legal advice, WSA action, and town council awareness. His interview is necessary to clarify what communications he received regarding the rate change, what legal advice he received or conveyed, whether and how those issues were elevated to the town council or the Water and Sewer Authority. And I think former Finance Director Sue Bapone can at least share with us if there were any items in the books about the rate increases. The litigation counsel, trial and appellate, can talk to us about whether paying under protest was advised, how statutory interest was factored into the litigation and appeal strategy, and what risk warnings were provided and to whom. The city of Waterbury, I think, asking former Mayor O'Leary or Corporation Counsel to talk with us about any settlement offers that they authorized or conveyed would be meaningful to help us confirm what was shared with us here in this setting, and whether Watertown was informed that only accepting Waterbury's rates was the only option. Listen, the record currently reflects this diffusion of authority, undocumented legal advice, and inconsistent recollections at critical decision points. If we're going to recommend safeguards, transparency standards, or structural changes, it must first establish who knew what, when they knew it, where the systems failed, and to convert knowledge into action. The only purpose of raising these issues under agenda item 5 is to get that information so that this never happens again.
I want to be very careful. I think that's very well thought out. We have a couple issues. Number one, how do we get in touch with all of these people? Pick up the phone and call Neil O'Leary and say, can you come in and talk to us?
I'm fine with being
Possibly, but I
yeah.
want to be very careful. You stated at the end, the charge of this committee is to make recommendations and safeguards. I agree, we need to understand what happened, but I also do not want this committee, it's not our charge to be pointing fingers. Yes, we absolutely need to understand what happened in order to prevent it from happening again. Agree, but we just need to be very cautious. So, let's go through, if everyone agrees, who else we would like to interview.
Let me just make a comment on what you just said. Nobody's sworn in here. Nobody's compelled to actually be honest, right? So if anybody feels that they're finger pointing, understand that we're gonna get the same kind of responses. Vague, not answering questions, just understand that that's what we're gonna be dealt with.
From probably the
From
majority,
yeah,
right? I
right.
mean, Neil O'Leary, of course, I would think he would say, of course we made attempts to negotiate. But, I mean, we can certainly try to to Mary Ann's point, this agenda certainly will not be done by February 2nd, which is fine. We said that in the beginning that, and I guess I would ask this committee, do you all have the time to continue in this realm? Just to make sure. So, that being said, in light of what you said, who else would you like to get in here to interview?
I think the most critical people that I mentioned are the WSA members.
Okay. Can you,
Make a motion?
no, can you just give me their names?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll start with those people. We're gonna go with Vincent Caterino, William Hedberg, Debbie DeSena, and James Sugden.
Yeah, James Sugden, we did have on the schedule and he was ill,
Okay,
but I can reach out to him again.
great. I also would like us to vote on whether we want to call and invite Bob Scannell to video conference with us.
Certainly we can make a motion for that too. I have no idea how to get in touch.
Of course.
So we can,
Of course.
anyone else?
We need a make a motion.
Yeah, we need a
Who was
motion.
the chair at the time?
Town council chair? Okay,
Yeah.
there were two, I think Mary Ann was during part of it. Let's see what I have.
That was brought up during this
Yeah.
meeting.
Ray per meeting. Ray per meeting. Round down and say Ray per meeting, thank you. Okay, would you like to make a motion?
Yes, I would like to make a motion. I'm gonna make several motions. I would like to make a first motion that we invite to interview Vincent Caterino, William Hedberg, Debbie DeSena, James Sugden, and
Ray per meeting.
Ray Permini.
Second that motion?
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes.
I would also like to make a motion that we make an effort to invite via video conference former town manager Robert Scannell.
Second? Any seconds?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes.
I'd like to make a motion that we request any memorandum, email documentation, or other records from our town's legal attorney, Jessel, regarding advice that he gave to town officials regarding raising the rates on WSA to set aside funding to protect the town in liability, consistent with Attorney Polisi's 2020 memo.
Do I have a second?
Second that motion?
Second that motion.
I second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Okay.
And I'd like to further discuss, before making a motion, about the value of communicating with Corporation Counsel, representative from Waterbury, regarding, if not former, I hear your reservations, and I want to be respectful to those. So, I do think there could be value in hearing their representation or their decision makers isn't so relevant to me. So I'd like to, I'd like to understand before making a motion what other people's opinion is on whether you see value in that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see a ton of value in it. I mean, it's probably interesting. But in terms of the objectives of what we're trying to accomplish here, I'm not sure it's the best use of our time. I do think if you want to understand Waterbury's perspective, if you look at the court documents and look at the post-trial briefs that they put together and some of those other pieces, I think you'll see their perspective in there. Whether some color commentary is, worthwhile, possibly, but I don't think you're going to get more information from reading the document. So I mean, from an efficiency perspective, I wouldn't necessarily advocate trying to do that, just in terms of all the other things that we got to do to try to come away from some good representation. I wouldn't vote against it if we wanted to interview, but it's not on my short list of priorities.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think Waterbury, from their perspective, they're going to feel that what they offered was reasonable, what they did was reasonable. And I don't think that they're going to say that it wasn't, whereas from Watertown's perspective, it was unreasonable, right? So I don't know that we're going to find out too much difference there.
Okay. That's fair to me. Then I'm going to go to the last item, which is, do we want to have discussion about the litigation attorneys? Or do we just want to make a motion on that?
The litigation attorneys, the ones from Hartford or the ones from Waterbury?
The ones for both the initial suit and then the appellate suit. Because what we're talking about in respect to that is, and I have my notes. What we're talking about in respect to that is, did they, in terms of strategy, paying under protest, was that advised, statutory interest factored into litigation and appeal strategy, what risk warnings were provided, and to whom? Are those items that we need to hear from a third party to determine what our team knew?
I'd suggest that, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, possibly 6 people to interview with our next meeting. Why don't we get through the 6 of them, and at the end of the next meeting, if we think we want to interview them, the litigation attorneys, we can arrange it for the following week?
There's no harm in tabling it for a week.
Right.
I'm completely okay with that.
Okay.
There's no harm in tabling it for a week. Okay, that's a reasonable thing to do. I agree.
Okay, so, in terms of the next meeting, which will be Tuesday, January 19th, because Monday is Martin Luther King Day and Town Hall is closed. We will meet at 5:30 again. I will reach out to, I'll see how many of these people I can get to attend that interview meeting, or the meeting. Are we planning to ask them the same questions we asked the previous interviewees?
I think we can switch those questions up a little bit, especially the first one.
get me whatever. And actually, if you could please CC Lisa as well, for Tanya.
Just as a point of information, on Tuesday, January 19th meeting,
Mhm.
I'll be here, but I'll be probably 5 to 10 minutes late because I'll be coming from Bethlehem and we have our men's Bible study till 5:30, so
Okay,
I'll leave there right over.
that's fine, yeah, because Mondays.
Gotcha, yeah, we'll be here.
Okay, so you will be here and we'll be a few minutes late, okay. Good,
I'll be,
okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Can I, but before we adjourn, one question. What is gonna be what is envisioned as the sort of final product of this committee? Are we putting a report together? Is it a set of written recommendations? I feel like if we have a good idea what the finish line looks like, it's gonna help us get there, so.
From my point of view, it would be a set of written recommendations, with each one having an explanation and some detail around why it was being made.
Okay.
And then that would be presented to the town council.
do we have, is that something maybe in one of the meetings moving forward, we should put that baseline together?
I think so. I mean, that's where I'm thinking
Yeah.
is as committee members, we probably should start like a straw man kind of draft of that. And then, maybe, it sounds like we've got a packed agenda for the 19th, but the following Monday after that.
Good luck. Anything else? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.